Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first ever All Hands on Data deep dive. If you're not aware of All Hands on Data, it's our team's newsletter where each member of our team takes a data article that they like that week and they write a blurb about it and we share it in a newsletter. We thought that you might want a deeper dive in some of the articles that we've shared in the past. So we decided to open up the warehouse of our old All Hands on Datas and we reached out to some authors and see if they wanted to share more about the articles that they wrote. We're so excited for this series so that we can learn more from these authors and we can glean more from what those articles gave us. We're so excited for this first installment. If you like this content, make sure you leave a like on this video and subscribe to our channel for more All Hands on Data deep dives. Without further ado, I'll let our first author introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Elena Dyachkova, and I'm a senior manager of data at Bubble.io.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for joining us and thanks for helping on the call. So if you missed her article in All Hands on Data, she wrote an article called "This Dashboard Could Have Been a Spreadsheet." And when I saw the article, that it lit me up just because we just had a Captain's Compass series come out that was about a BI analyst, and then I have a past as a BI analyst as well, and it's always a fight between kind of the more technical side of the audience and the non-technical side of the audience about whether or not you should use a dashboard, you should use a spreadsheet, you should some mixture of the two. So I'm going to start off with a very unfair question, and then I promise they'll get more fair as we go. So if you had to choose to either abolish all dashboards or abolish all spreadsheets, what would be the right option?
Ooh, I will probably abolish the dashboards, to be honest, just because spreadsheet can be a dashboard, right? And it's flexible and you can kind of analyze it and wrangle it. And a dashboard is just a dashboard. Once you build a dashboard, that's like its final state. So I think, yeah, I would definitely abolish the dashboards.
That's gonna be the thumbnail of the video is abolish all dashboards.
Abolish all
just
dashboards.
make sure it's you and not me saying it. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. So in your article, you kind of talk about how this process was whenever you were back working at Peloton, and you talked about how you kind of transitioned from kind of an individual contributor, kind of working with the data to being more of a manager. So can you talk about, I know this will be a little bit off with your article, but can you talk about kind of the differences in your daily work of being an individual contributor versus being a manager at a company of that size?
Yeah, I think it's evolved over time. When I joined Peloton, they were already fairly big, but it still felt, even as I started managing, that I was doing a lot of IC work myself and I was really close to the work. But then obviously through COVID and zero interest period, Peloton has grown a lot, and my team had gone from me having 2 or 3 direct reports to having 14 direct reports, and the number of data teams at Peloton also grew from maybe 2, just my team and the BI team, to having probably 7 or 8, where we had 2 product analytics team, a marketing analytics team, supply chain analytics, content research, data science, and it was. As a manager, the work has really starts focusing a bit more on the process and stakeholder management, because in this case you have to coordinate across multiple data teams if there are specific cross-functional research projects or questions where a narrow view within a single function is not sufficient. And the company itself, as companies grow, they introduce more processes around, road mapping, OKRs, performance reviews. So a lot of the work kind of shifts in that space, just enabling your team to do work and make sure they have the right visibility, make sure I'm protecting them from all the, thrash that comes usually with various reorgs, reprioritizations. So it is definitely, I would say, not my favorite to be in that space of managing a larger team or in a more kind of middle management space. Hence, I've enjoyed a lot being able to shift back to a smaller company at Bubble. We're at about 140 people right now, and my team is only 3 people at the moment. So it's not only that, hey, I can actually touch data myself, which I love, but also just generally there isn't as much process in the company overall, and I really like it. It feels more innovative, more scrappy, and I enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, I feel like as you move from as you get as your company gets bigger and bigger, it leaves you less room for experimentation because you really have to worry about operating successfully, which obviously is needed. You need to be successful and not take too many risks, but it's always fun to take those risks, right?
Right, right. And I like to optimize for impact. And as the company grows, it I think gets harder to do it. There is an additional vector of optimization, which is for optics, where certain not taking a certain request could be a bad look, or shifting a certain project could be a bad look. So you have to always keep in mind the angle of optics as well. It's kind of sad, but it is reality, and I understand that it's important to, have the processes in place and extra structures in place when the company grows big. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I have my Peloton bike over there in the corner, but I won't ask any more Peloton questions. No, so the next section of your article, you talk about kind of organizing like the KPIs and picking those out. And I thought that was like really interesting because I think that's something that organizations don't do a great job of. Like that's something we always fight about actually setting those KPIs. And you talked about that you use this like a North Star metric, and you had like a tree structure. So can you talk about like can you talk a little bit more about how you talk to those stakeholders, like both on the data side and on like the actual business stakeholder side, about how you set those metrics and how you were able to kind of make some like actually get to the point of making a concrete decision on like, hey, these are the ones that we want to chase after.
Yeah, I think it was really fun to have the discussion about metrics to be non-technical, because if you ask a non-technical stakeholder of, who is responsible for metrics, they would say the data team, and they would come to the data team and say, hey, give me some metrics. But I don't think that's a fair approach, right? Because folks on the data team, especially if the data team is not embedded in a specific function, but it's more a generalist team, would inevitably lack a degree of context, be it the strategic context or business context, functional context. And, data folks can definitely explore data and run a lot of, regression models and throw, hundreds of features in them and, get somewhere with it. But that doesn't mean that the metrics that will become a result of this process would be good ones, in the sense that, hey, is that something that people can understand? Is it something that actually, maybe it shows correlation but doesn't make kind of causal sense or conceptual sense? So I took an approach where I collected a group of cross-functional leadership on the product team, and we did a workshop. We didn't look, I guess we looked at the data a little bit at the end, but 80% of the workshop we did not look at a single metric. But I kind of walked them through the premise of having a North Star metric, the premise of having a framework that sort of ladders up from leading to lagging. I showed them some examples that I pulled online from Spotify and Instacart for different consumer companies, to kind of show them what the kind of the tree-like or formula-like structure could look like. And then we just brainstormed. People got divided in groups, and we brainstormed what could be a good definition of a North Star metric for Peloton that makes sense based on our value prop. And it was so much fun because folks came up with very interesting ideas that we haven't evaluated before. And I think if I was trying to do this bottoms up, I probably wouldn't have thought about them. For example, I guess our resulting North Star metric was number of users who work out at least 3 out of the last 4 weeks, kind of speaking to the value prop of Peloton that, unlike a gym or unlike a diet or some fad, it can actually establish that like weekly regularity, right? So it sort of like takes that into account. But I think another thing that was really important for Peloton, especially early on, is that it provided a better cost efficiency compared to something like SoulCycle, because SoulCycle you pay $30 per class, or $50 per class. At Peloton you pay $30 per month plus whatever the hardware cost distributed over the lifetime. So somebody had an idea of like, wouldn't we formulate our North Star metric based on that, to make sure that, I don't know, track like money saved over time, right? And that's such a good idea. And I think it actually, was an idea that would have worked, that was really, really tied to the strategy and to our value prop, and something that would be easy for folks to internalize. So it was a really fun exercise. And of course, once we collected these metric ideas, then it goes back to the data team to validate them, make sure they're correlated with revenue, and that we can actually calculate them. So I would always suggest for folks who start working on metrics, don't look at the data until you've had those conversations with your PMs or your, non-technical stakeholders and counterparts and try to really suss out of like what is your hypothesis. Being able to grow is a function of our ability to do X. What is X? And try to then, once you have the qualitative mapping, then it's the time to actually create metrics around it.
Yeah, and I think that's been the big like disconnect that organization. It seems so simple, right? But it's like if it's only the data team trying to come up with these metrics, it's not going to work. And if it's only the business stakeholders trying to come up with the metrics, that's probably not going to work either. So it has to be a relationship there that you can build out together. Because at the end of the day, like even if you pick out these perfect metrics, the other side has to agree to them as well, and actually has to want to use them. So going into my next question, so how did you continue to get these stakeholders to buy into those metrics that you were pitching to, like that you were giving them on the weekly basis? Like how, like, did they ever try to get off kilter to get off of like the metrics they agreed to? Like, how did you keep them on task of only looking at what you wanted them to look at?
Yeah, I think it is a process, and I would never expect that a framework that's set would persist for years without any changes. And for me, rolling it out, part of it is the same thing as in product development, where you roll out your MVP and you need to get user feedback and figure out if you need to make changes. So for me, it was the same thing. When it was rolled out initially, the main thing for me was, hey, I know that certain things are pretty solid as far as structure, right? But then once we started looking at the metrics weekly, and here I had to help out and build the habits. So I was posting kind of highlights on Slack. We had monthly leadership meetings. So I would, I asked for some time to actually show some quick recaps. So that way, once I'm kind of made sure that people are actually thinking about them monthly, then I will check in with folks and, kind of jot down the questions that I would usually get. And it did evolve. It didn't stay the same over time. Let's say one metric that wasn't included initially was anything about kind of social engagement on the platform. And especially as COVID kind of progressed, that social aspect became much more important for growth, right? So folks kept telling us, hey, we've shipped a few social features and we feel like they should be helping. How can we quantify it? Is that something that is going to persist, or is it just a COVID fad? So we, had to go back and do some research and figure out if social engagement was actually impactful for retention and formulate the metrics. So it was definitely a process where we did kind of small iterations and as well as metrics themselves, as well as the visualization to make sure that folks could actually understand, what they were seeing on the dashboard.
No, yeah, all that's super interesting. I think it almost seems like you could maybe make a course out of that, which I think you did. So if you could give me like the 2-sentence pitch on your course, I know there's a link to it in the article if anyone wants to check it out. But can you give us like the 2 or 3-sentence pitch on what they would learn from that course?
Yeah, I think my course is very different from a lot of other offerings because it doesn't necessarily focus on the technical skills. So we don't, learn coding and we don't go deep on some advanced stats or ML or anything like that, but we really learn the application of it, right? So if you have a high level idea of what analytics is, you don't have to be an analyst to have that idea. How does it specifically apply for product? The standard use cases, defining product metrics framework, defining metrics for feature launch, defining metrics for a design experiment, figuring out how to collect product data. So all of the practical applications kind of end to end, from being able to connect business to product and all the way to actually being able to collect the right data. So if you're excited to learn a little bit more about that subset of analytics, then it's a good course.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we put a link to it in the description if you want to check it out. But yeah, like I said, I do think there's always the two sides of the conversation, right? Where it's like someone focuses super on the technical skills and can do coding extremely well, like write the machine learning models, like write SQL, do models. And then there's like the other side where people like really understand business logic, or really understand what needs to happen. But there's no one in the middle. And then I think that the middle people might be the most important, that can like tie those two groups of people together. But I'll stop selling your course. We'll make sure that we put a link to it so people can check it out. So yeah, so transitioning from picking out those metrics into actually creating what you created for Peloton. I know you talked about it a little bit in your article, but what kind of made you make that initial decision to not make a Looker dashboard, but actually make a spreadsheet?
Yeah, I think two things. The first thing was just the need to do it quickly, or my desire to do it quickly. And my team at that point in time didn't have any, analytics engineers or data engineers, and some of the data was already readily available in Looker, and some of it wasn't. And from that perspective, it was like, okay, either I spend another month to try to figure this out, or I just do it in a spreadsheet because I can using Looker API, Amplitude API, and kind of it's still sort of semi-automated, almost entirely automated. And then another thing is just visual. I think for an executive dashboard that goes to the chief product officer, VP, it's really really important for it to be very very succinct and articulate well. And Looker, I think, is one of the better tools as far as visualization goes, but it's still not fairly rigid in how things can be organized. So I don't know, when I was envisioning that dashboard in my head and kind of drawing it on a piece of paper, I didn't feel like I would be able to make it look exactly like that in Looker. And I'm unfortunately very good with Excel spreadsheets, so I guess I'm like, yeah, I can definitely make it happen. So yeah, and it ended up working out, and then there were additional benefits that I didn't think about initially, but actually permissioning was one of them too, because Looker is always like, oh, you need a license, oh, are we paying for this license, blah blah, and the Google Sheet, you just give the access, and easy peasy.
Right. Yeah. No, for sure. And then, so you mentioned that, it's really important to create something that's succinct and almost eye-catching, right, for like people in upper management to actually look at it. So was there a change in behavior from upper management and like this approach once you were able to like push this dashboard out to them? Like, did they ask more questions? Did they seem more interested? Like, what kind of positive effects came after getting this thing out?
Yeah, I think it was just much more streamlined conversation where we finally had some shared language, because even, prior to that, landing on the definition of, an engaged user was something that was non-trivial, because you would ask different people and they would give you a slightly different answer. Well, now, hey, we have this definition of folks who work out 3 out of the last 4 weeks, and that's your definition. So just creating that common language and creating the common mental model where everyone has the same information about, hey, here's our funnel performing, here's how our retention is performing, which is really helpful and cut out a lot of noise and a lot of kind of back and forth and thrash around both requests to build the dashboards with new metrics every time, as well as just making conversations a bit more meaty, where we didn't have to debate the definitions of metrics anymore.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then you mentioned in your article that, I think one of the pros of using a dashboard is that things generally update on their own. Like I think that is one of the pluses, is that especially a tool like Looker, right, where it's kind of pulling data in on its own. So you mentioned that you had to like manually update this thing. But you mentioned that it did allow you to like catch some mistakes as they came in and like actually kind of do some data monitoring. So can you talk about that, what that process looked like for you every week? Like, what did you actually have to go in and do? And like, how did that process end up being helpful for you versus being a chore?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was a chore to a degree, of course. But yeah, it was lots of the data was coming from Looker, and there's actually an ability to connect Looker API to a Google Sheet. So then, you just connect a bunch of looks, you click one button, and all the data refreshes. So it's like one of the more streamlined parts. There was a similar integration. I don't know if they still have it, but Amplitude has a plugin for Google Sheets where you can, same thing, you connect the data and it can refresh. That one was a little buggy. Sometimes it would kind of duplicate rows, so I had to make sure that my formulas were pointing to the right place. I think the most annoying thing was engineering metrics, because they existed in New Relic, and lots of these observability tools like New Relic, Datadog, they either have it's hard to export the data, or they have like short retention windows where it's impossible to maintain long-term trend there. So this was literally, I would open New Relic and actually like type in numbers into a Google Sheet. Yeah, unfortunately. So this was the worst part about it, unfortunately. But obviously important metrics that we had to track, and they were actually correlated with engagement. So it was not the work that was done in vain. But yeah, it's, sort of create a situation where I was a bit of a bottleneck. So then I had to train a couple other people to update it. And we always had to keep an eye on like making sure that at least one person who knows how to update it is there on Monday. If Monday's a holiday, I'd still log in and, for half an hour, poke around, make sure that the data is updated. So it was definitely not ideal. And by the time I left the company in 2022, I think for the last couple of months, we were both trying to hire an analytics engineer to kind of speed up some of the automation, and also trying to actually shift it into Looker, because I think another ability that folks wanted is to have filters on top of this, which is definitely much harder to achieve in a Google Sheet. So it would have ended up in Looker anyways eventually, but for the first couple of years, Google Sheet was perfect.
So you mentioned, like, I know like there's limitations obviously to using spreadsheets, which I think is the plus of dashboards, right? I mean, that's why dashboards exist, is they have that added functionality. So thinking back, I guess it's been what, 3-4 years now. If you could look back on that situation again, do you think you would do the same process you did like before, or like would you make any changes to what you did in that process?
Yeah, I think now there are other tools that make it a little bit easier to sort of cobble something together as a POC. So something like Hex or DeepNote or something that's kind of flexible and can allow you to both, get some data out of the data warehouse and visualize it quickly without necessarily building a full-fledged data pipeline. Plus, you can also upload a CSV or point it to a Google Drive in case some data doesn't quite exist in, a data warehouse yet. So I think now my approach would have been to maybe start with a tool like that to, create a prototype and same thing, kind of test drive it for a few months as an MVP. And then once the definitions are a little bit more buttoned up, then consider switching it to a proper BI tool. So yeah, now I probably would have taken that approach. But back then, my Python also wasn't great, so I wouldn't have, built like a Streamlit application or something like that. To be fair, visualizations in Python are hard, so it probably would have been ugly if I was doing it. But yeah, I think that would have been the main difference. But the approach, I think, would have been the same. For something like this, I would probably have started with more of a smaller POC that was visually compelling, but not necessarily productionized, and then refine it as folks start give feedback.
Sure, and I think you almost answered the question I'm about to ask you, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. So, like, since you're still a manager, like on a data team, so like, how has this process and like what you've learned kind of in the data space, like, how has it affected the way that you kind of lead your data team now? Like, what kind of decisions do you make now that you probably wouldn't have made without these experiences that you had?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. I think I generally pay a lot of attention on metrics, two metrics, both in my previous company, Spring Health, my current company, Bubble. One of my first initiatives is really to button up a good metrics framework that feels structured. I think it really saves a lot of pain in those prioritization roadmap discussions because it helps figure out the actual business levers. So I think this is something that I've learned, and my Peloton experience had proved it. And I still pay a lot of attention to it.
What advice would you give to, data professionals, data managers that are kind of operating small teams? Like what kind of advice would you give them to still make an impact, like with their small team, but not be too overwhelmed with too much stuff coming in?
Yeah, I think it's really all about prioritization. So always anchor on what is something that would make the largest business impact. Where is the biggest, meatiest questions that would answer to which would materially affect the course of action of the company. So it really helps to stay close with the leadership and check in with them. Hey, what's top of mind? What are you thinking now? What are you thinking about? What are some big questions? And take all of them down, jot all of them down, and from the data perspective, also being able to assess a potential revenue impact if we've solved a given question and gave a recommendation. So I usually just keep your ear to the ground and make sure that you're indexing on that impact versus on technical initiatives. I guess I can give an example at Bubble, right? Like we have some opportunity to, further optimize our data pipeline. We already optimized it a bunch. When I came in, we cut down a big chunk of Snowflake cost. With that optimization, we cut the runtime by 50%, but there's still, a lot of opportunity to make it even faster, a little bit cheaper. And let's say our runtime is 2 hours, right? And I could maybe get it down to 30 minutes. Would my stakeholders notice the difference? No, because it runs overnight, and for them, hey, the data's there in the morning. They don't care if it ran for 2 hours or for 30 minutes, right? So I could spend a bunch of time doing that, because for me, I still think it's important to do, right? But there is a whole another thing of like, hey, how can we figure out who is our ICP? And answering that question, probably about the same effort, maybe a little bit more, but it's much more impactful. And yes, it is more intimidating to get into something so ambiguous versus, refactoring the pipeline, which is kind of resource intensive but less ambiguous, right? But I definitely should be working on ICPs versus refactoring the pipeline in this specific case. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, it's good advice. It's always easy to kind of chase after those what some would consider easy wins, right? Like if you can change that pipeline from 2 hours to 30 minutes, like it's a pretty big win, but like, does it actually matter, right? And I think that's what I took away from your article more than anything, was that instead of just like going out and doing things, like you need to prove the value of what you're going to do, and then choose the best course of action based on that, right? So like in your example that you had, like creating that spreadsheet took 2 or 3 days versus the weeks it was going to take or months. I mean, we've built data pipelines, so it could take months, right? To like properly get all that data coming into into your data warehouse, like getting it into Looker, like doing all that stuff. Like it wasn't worth that time to get that. Whenever you could do it in a couple of days. So with all hands on data, we obviously share articles from other people, and we want to make sure that good authors are always highlighted. So I know that you're starting your own kind of newsletter, your own Substack called Dramatic Analyst, right? Yeah, there we go. Just want to make sure I was right there. So what kind of content? I know you have 2 or 3 or 4 pieces kind of written on there right now. So like, what kind of content would people expect if they subscribe to your newsletter?
Yeah, definitely. I think at the moment I'm trying to highlight lots of product analytics adjacent topics, kind of from the experience that I have accumulated. But I think in the future I also want to venture into a little bit of maybe career advice, since I've hired a lot of people, I've interviewed a ton of people, so I think I also can offer some perspective there, and like career development, interviewing, highlighting maybe good opportunities. So for now I'm kind of in a low-key mode, but as the time goes, we'll see how the engagement goes with the newsletter, and have some other ideas.
Awesome, that's great. So obviously we'll put a link to the newsletter in this as well, so people can click on it and make sure you subscribe to that. And then any other places you'd want people to find you? Like, do you have? I think I follow you on Twitter, so I think that's a place that people can follow you, is on Twitter. But do you have LinkedIn? Like, where else can people find you to keep up to date with what you're doing?
Yeah, Twitter and LinkedIn are the best places to find me. I'm hiring currently as well. I'm hiring a lead data engineer, a kind of a founding data engineer for my team at Bubble, and Bubble also hiring engineering managers for like non-data roles. So we're actually hiring quite a bit. So if you also are interested, please check out our job postings and apply.
If you like this video or learned something from this video, feel free to subscribe to our channel or check out these other related videos.